In this video, we're going to talk about how we should communicate with customers when it comes to demeaning Penguin or our staff or Penguin's products or systems or policies, etc. So you never want to figuratively tear down or demean another technician, the office, products that we use, equipment that we use, services that we've done in the past, or anything like that. You never want to say anything bad about anything that is connected to Penguin, to a customer, or to a prospective customer. You simply want to build on what we have done and then focus on the future, and then omit conversation where you'd have to speak ill or negatively about Penguin in any way. Again, this is to a customer or to a prospective customer. Now, obviously, if there's issues, if there's things that are wrong or problems, then that's something that should be addressed and should be brought up internally within the company. And we have a system, it's called EOS, and so if you're a manager, you can list that in level 10. If you are not part of the EOS meetings, then you can just simply mention that to a manager, express what's going on, and then ask them to list it in level 10. And then when the leadership team meets, then they can talk about that issue. So we're not talking about fixing problems. We're simply saying that if Penguin ever makes mistakes, or if a technician goes out and does a job, and then you're a follow-up technician, for example, and you have to go do a cleanup, quote unquote cleanup, for example, clean up the mess that they made, you don't want to speak ill about the technician that came out in the past. So you never want to tell a customer that your equipment sucks or that the office is doing a bad job. It's really simple. You just never want to say anything bad about the company in any way to customers or to prospective customers ever. That's how it works. So I'll share a quick story. I think it articulates this concept that I'm trying to teach very well. In 2020, we had this customer in Telluride, and we'd sent, I think, like 4 or 5 different technicians out to their house. They kept seeing these droppings inside of their house. And they'd sweep them up, and then just a little while later, more would appear. And so obviously the customer doesn't like that. This particular customer was a super high-end house, and they were ready to burn the place down. I mean, it was a really big problem. Also, this was a property management account, so if we did a bad job on that house, the property management company would drop all of the accounts that we had, and it would just be a big fat problem. So anyways, I went out there. I brought this super tall ladder because I knew that it was a super tall house. In fact, here's a picture of it. I mean, it was like a cathedral style house, right? You had to have like a special ladder, and plus it was a pain in the butt to get the ladder up there because the ladder had to be so big it wouldn't fit up through the stairs, and so I had to bring it up through the balcony. But anyways, that's a different story. So anyways, when I got there, I relatively quickly discovered that the droppings were from bats. As soon as I got up, right here in this area, it was very obvious. I could just peek up there. It was clearly a bat problem. And this was a big problem for us because the previous technicians had incorrectly diagnosed the problem as a mouse issue. And incidentally, they'd laid down a ton of mouse bait, and they told the customer that they thought that there was a mouse problem, which obviously all the bait that we put down, all the treatments that we didn't fix the problem because it wasn't mice, it was bats that was leaving the droppings. So I was in an awkward situation. The customer understandably wanted to know what the pest problem was, and when I told them bats, I knew that they were going to be mad because they'd spent all this time before. All the previous technicians had thought and incidentally had told them that they were mice. Also, it's kind of worth noting that a large part of the problem in the misidentification was the fact that when the technicians had went out there, their normal standard sized ladders weren't big enough to be able to get up to these rafters and do an adequate inspection. So, there's the question, could I blame the problem on the equipment? Obviously not, because if I went to the customer and I said, hey, our ladders weren't good enough, then that's going to be just as bad. I mean, either way, the customer, what they're going to hear is either our techs suck or our ladders suck. So I'm like in this between a rock and a hard spot. Also, I couldn't blame the problem of the misidentification, the misdiagnosis on their large house, because that actually probably was the bigger problem, was the fact that they had such a big house that our regular ladders didn't get up there. But if I went to the customer and I said, hey, look, the reason that we misidentified them was because you've got such a big house, our ladders don't reach. Obviously, that's going to make the customer not happy, because they're going to likely respond by saying, wait, how is your misidentification of the pest problem our fault? You know what I mean? Like, they're just, either way, if I blame it on the techs, that's going to sound like Penguin sucks. If I blame it on our equipment, then that's going to sound like Penguin sucks. And if I blame it on their house, that they're going to resent me for that, right? So what do? What's the answer? How do you go about, being a tech that shows up after other techs have been out? What do you do? On the one hand, I'm saying you never demean Penguin. You never demean our techs. You never speak ill about our services. You never say that we suck with anything, right? But now I'm in this situation where it's like, what do you do? So what did I do? Well, it's actually really simple. I said to the customer, this is actually bats, not mice. Mice and bats both leave very similar droppings, and sometimes, short of a lab test, it takes a few inspections to correctly diagnose the problem. However, I'm confident that we have the problem correctly identified at this point. Now what we need to do is just focus on how to get rid of the pest from this point forward. Then from there, I focused completely on the future. I focused on the treatment plan that I was putting together. I focused on timelines, how long from this point forward it was going to take us to solve the problem. I didn't go in at all into our faulty equipment or lack thereof. I didn't talk about previous technicians. I didn't go into our training or whatever. Who cares? That's all in the past. And honestly, the customer doesn't really care either. So the concept here is any kind of a Penguin issue, of a Penguin problem, I should say, any kind of a Penguin problem is not a conversation that a company should ever have with a customer or a potential customer. If there is an issue, if any conversation that we need to have about a mistake that was made, like I said at the beginning of this video, that's a conversation for the leadership team, an internal conversation within the company, not a conversation that we should have with a customer. Now, I'm going to note one thing, which I think this is a really important concept. The customer in this case, they did press me about what happened. So as I just mentioned, I simply said, look, they're really similar. Sometimes it takes a little while to identify them correctly, but we've got them identified correctly at this point. Let's move on, right? That's what I started with. But in this case, the customer did come back and they said, we've had how many services and inspections at this point? You're just barely figuring out that it's bats. What happened? So they pressed me on it. What did I do? Again, it's really simple. I just said, look, I'm really, really sorry that we misidentified the pest problem, but we now know what's going on, and we now know how to get rid of these stupid little buggers. So think about what I said there. I said, I'm sorry that we misidentified them, but at this point, these stupid little pests in your house, we're going to get rid of them. The customer wanted to be mad, right? They wanted to be frustrated at something. They kind of needed an enemy, right? And so by framing my response in that way, I was able to frame Penguin and the customer as part of the same team. And the enemy being the pest. So if they wanted something to be ticked off at, it should be the bats, right? They shouldn't be mad at us. We're here to help them. Penguin and the customer, again, we're on the same team. So if a customer is ticked off and they want to be mad at something, think in your mind, how can I frame the pest as the enemy and thereby direct their frustration towards the pest so that they see us as their ally, as their team member, as their bro, as their compadre, and they see the pest as the problem, which is as it should be, right? Like, we are on their team. I'm not the one who put the bats up there. It's not my fault that whoever built this left great big gaping holes in it and the bats could come in. It's not my fault that bats happen to poop when they come in when they come into here. It's not my fault that they made a nest. I was there to help them. So don't be mad at me. The problem is the bats. Let's get rid of them. So by omitting a conversation where you have to speak ill of someone, that's usually step number one. And that's usually your go-to. If you can just simply omit the conversation, you don't need to talk about what happened in the past. Just focus on here and now, the future, what we can do to move forward. And if you do have to have a conversation where something went wrong, try to frame your response in such a way where the customer sees the pest as the enemy. And then from that point, then focus all of your energy and your conversation on the future, how to move forward. And if you do that, I guarantee you'll have a lot more success with customers. Customers will like you better. Customers will like us better. The company will like you more because you'll be a better technician or a better office staff. This is true. It doesn't matter what the situation, whether you're office staff, sales, manager, everybody should follow this concept and this policy. And one other little thing that I'm going to note, and then that'll be it. Sometimes technicians think that if they go in and they tear down other technicians, it builds them up, and so it makes them look like a better technician. That's asinine. It doesn't work that way. If you tear other people down, it doesn't elevate yourself. That's a truism in life. If you go out there and a previous technician that was at a service has done a poor job, even if they've objectively done a poor job, if you tear them down, it doesn't build you up. On the contrast, though, if you go out there and you're cleaning up, quote unquote, cleaning up a service for a technician that came before you that did a objectively poor job, if you simply do what I've taught you here and you focus on the future, you don't tear anybody down, counterintuitively, that will elevate you more than tearing down the person who came before you. Because here's why. At the end of the day, you have a great big penguin on your chest, okay? You have a great big penguin on your hat. And so if you tear down penguin in any way, if you tear down a technician, if you tear down the office, if you tear down a manager, whatever, if you tear down our equipment, in any way, if you demean or diminish or tear down the Penguin brand, you're wearing the Penguin brand. You got on your chest and you've got on your hat. So if you tear down that brand, it's going to take you with it. That's just the truth of the matter. So try not to do that. Lift other people up. And if you do that, you'll be a better person. You'll be a better employee. It will elevate Penguin. And in doing so, it will also elevate you both as a human and as a representative for Penguin Pest Control. That's all I've got.